speak like this. Am I a good girl, mommy? World's biggest doll factory and more. Listen, you little rat. Today man has too much power. The Roman Empire collapsed with the assassination of Caesar. And why? Because of too much power. Feudalism blew up with the French Revolution. And why? Because of too much power. And today the whole world will blow up. And why? Because of too much power.
Capitalism is inherently coercive by design. We are born under capitalism. We did not choose the capitalist reality, but the capitalist reality has presented itself upon us by force. Capitalism thrives on a competitive current that expands into several stages of imperialism and neoliberalism. Capitalists, especially libertarians and so-called anarcho-capitalists, will argue in defense of capitalism, saying that it is consensual, that a voluntary contract is made for one to serve under. However, what they don't seem to understand is to do labor for someone is not the same as serving someone with the sole ownership of the means of production for a wage. Because no matter how you slice it, capitalism is a vertical hierarchy that focuses on maintaining a transactional relationship between the rich and the poor. Not to mention the old popular saying, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. However, in this video, we will be doing a lot of defining for the sake of convenience to more effectively drive home the point. So when we speak of coercion or a coercive hierarchy, what do we mean by that? Coercion is the practice of persuading someone to do something, usually by force or threats. For example, when you think of capitalists, anarcho-capitalists, and far-right libertarians, what do you think of in terms of their defense of capitalism? The assertion that capitalism is voluntary. Well, let's take a look at the Industrial Revolution, which was a champion of child slavery, especially child labor. Working unions organized to put a stop to child labor so that children can be at home with their parents and that their parents can provide for their children. Not to mention the advocacy of children being educated in an education system. There are so many socialist organizations, such as the Black Panthers, who had feeding programs for children in the morning. Are these actors in bad faith really going to make the case that children consented to wage slavery? Oh, and yeah, child slavery was never truly abolished. To this very day, U.S. corporations like Nestle, Hershey's, Mars, Archer Daniels Midland Company, Cadbury, Kraft, Fuller's Chocolate, Crunch, Kit Kat, Aero, H&M, Forever 21, Gap, Zara, Urban Outfitters, Aldo, Adidas, Walmart, Victoria's Secret, Apple, Disney, Philip Morris, Toys R Us, and so many more use child labor in some capacity. See, the primary difference between this form of child slavery and child slavery during the Industrial Revolution is that child employment is outsourced. It is also really fascinating when taking into account that so many citizens of the US empire are always concerned about the availability of work here at home. Even US politicians champion themselves on the promise of more labor that will somehow become available to US citizens once they are elected. Sometimes their rhetoric on this issue is different depending on the platform as well as the private investor, but the goal is primarily the same, being the profit motive. Democrats in the U.S. electoral system tend to lobby with oil and energy companies on the dishonest platform of reducing carbon emissions.
We need a collective act of science and political will.
Notice how these same politicians, while openly acknowledging the effects of climate change and its catastrophic potential, will continue to fund oil companies.
Topping that list, climate change, ahead of a crucial summit this fall. President Biden vowing to double American aid to poorer nations, tackling the climate crisis.
Whether we choose to fight for our shared future or not, will reverberate for generations yet to come.
On August 31st, 2021, the Biden administration announced plans to open millions of acres for the potential of gas and oil drilling. This includes over 80 million acres of ocean in the Gulf of Mexico. Given that the Gulf of Mexico is only 395 million acres, we're looking at 20% of the entirety of the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico is also known for yearly record-breaking hurricanes, floodings, and catastrophic natural disasters caused by the production of carbon emissions. Holy shit. And according to the Carbon Majors report of 2017, 100 companies alone are responsible for 71% of greenhouse gases and carbon emissions. Even big ol' ExxonMobil over here has at one point flat out admitted to this trend in the 1980s. You think I'm kidding, right? No, I'm dead serious. ExxonMobil actually did a report in 1981 predicting the rate in which its own production of emissions would perpetuate a cycle of climate catastrophe.
Does this mean ExxonMobil is #woke?
Oh my god, no, it doesn't.
We don't have much time left. Hang on, everybody. Let's do it!
Because in this same report where ExxonMobil admitted to this trend happening to climate catastrophe because of its own emissions, it decides to make excuses for this shit. The focus of the report was not really to warn people of climate catastrophe, but to grant itself plausible deniability from responsibility. Their claim in 1981 was that in 100 years' time, there will be ample time to switch to a non-fossil fuel industry if policies were to be passed against the expropriation of fossil fuels. This is not only reliant on the fact that the state will turn a blind eye on climate change for 100 years in hope that there won't be too much damage from climate change and global warming to maintain a productive labor force, but this doesn't even take into account that children are gonna have to put up with fucking shitty conditions for the next 100 years until the state decides that climate change has gone too far. So my question to Joseph Biden is, if the data is so clear, like you say literally all the fucking time...
Look, guys, we in fact made it clear. I made it clear.
Then why hasn't there been any meaningful or ample action to stop this acceleration? I think the answer is obvious if we follow the money. We see politicians like former US President Donald Trump making a case against immigration.
I know we make foreign policy out to be this great skill that somehow is sort of like a secret code.
Primarily to scare American workers into believing immigrants are stealing their jobs and increasing unemployment. Casting aside the obvious point that Donald Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, casting aside the obvious point on how immigrants can't even acquire work in the United States without some kind of legal permit, work visa, or citizenship in the first place, so many immigrants who originate from nations of the global south are coerced to immigrate for various reasons. Some immigrants are climate refugees because of carbon emissions caused by those 100 companies alone being 71%. People in other nations are often faced with extremely dangerous conditions, including but not limited to pollution, extreme and rapid temperature changes, and oftentimes imperialist military interventions with the intent of extracting labor and resources. On the subject of imperialist intervention, this usually leads to destabilizing entire governments, even democratically elected ones like Chile in 1973, Iran in 1953, Guatemala in 1954, the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1893, Panama and Honduras in 1903, Haiti in 1915. Actually, there's an entire list and it's super fucking long and pretty damning. Even Afghanistan, where the United States backed the Mujahideen with the intent to aid their fight against the Soviet Union in 1980s, The same guerrilla forces that the United States Empire aided would go on to form Al-Qaeda, including Osama bin Laden himself. Osama bin Laden was once considered an anti-Soviet hero in 1993. So with that said, is Osama bin Laden still an anti-Soviet hero after the events of 9/11 2001? Is Osama bin Laden and the former Mujahideen guerrillas just no longer useful to the US Empire's conquest for power and hegemony? Keep in mind, Osama bin Laden at one point had investments in the Carlyle Group along with George H. Walker Bush. It is also just pretty fucking damning when you realize just how this foreign intervention was purposed for the sake of profitability of heroin trade with the CIA, keeping in mind that this was also during the fruition of the war on drugs, on top of competing with the Soviet Union for imperialist power. But all of this shit in the aftermath of said intervention went as far as to justify the war on terror, accelerating the weapons and fossil fuel industry in the 2000s. Pretty fucking damning that Dick Cheney, George W. Bush's vice president, was also the CEO of Halliburton, one of the world's largest oil companies, until his term as vice president. Given that Colin Powell was the Secretary of State from 2001 to 2005, it makes sense that Colin Powell would advocate for an invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, manipulating and pulling the heartstrings of those traumatized by the attacks of September 11 and 2001 on the World Trade Center in an extremely dishonest light, hiding the ulterior motive of oil extraction for profitability. Also, in recent events, I will address this once. I am not speaking ill of the dead. Scrutinizing a plutocratic apologist is not the same as scrutinizing your aunt who passed away due to habitual drinking. One of these is a product of the tragedy of our system unable to properly address habitual harm to oneself. The other is a dirty, no-good politician who lived comfortably as he wrongfully justifies a multinational genocidal war. As we can see, these are varying examples of coercion, and that they take many forms with differing results. But if we are talking about the effects of capitalism in the context of coercion, how can we measure capitalism as a functioning system to begin with? And who is it functioning for?